Welcome, everybody. I'm Amy Morris. I'm one of the librarians at Pima County Public Library. And me and Carl will be the moderator facilitators of this interview for the Tucson Festival of Books teen and tween audio interviews. And today, as you know, we'll be interviewing Dr. Amra Sabic-El Rayess, and Amphi High School will be interviewing her today. But welcome, Dr. Amra. Hopefully spring comes soon to New York, and we can't wait to hear everything you can tell us about your great book. And that's the last thing. This is the kids, the students got to read The Cat I Never Named, Dr. Amra's memoir.
Awesome. I'm just going to say that I am so excited. I've traveled the world with this story and with this book. I've been probably in more than 20 countries by now talking about my memoir, but I am most excited to be talking to teens. And in fact, if I'm ever nervous, it is when I'm waiting for a question from a teen, because they are always the most brilliant questions. So I'm delighted to be here.
Okay. Hi, Amra. My name's Nico. I was the one that texted you in the chat. I'm so glad to be interviewing today. Thank you so much for taking your time. So my first question is, so when I was reading this book, the one thing that really got me was the cat. You are living like in this time in the world where it was just unforgivable things that happened to you, to your family, to your country. And this cat that came to you was like a symbol of hope in the darkness. So I was going to ask, have you ever felt another significant connection to another cat or to another animal that just, gave you that hope or another piece of hope again in this world?
Thank you, Nico, for that wonderful question, and really a reflection about the importance of Matzi, or as all of you who now have read the book know, it simply means kitty in Bosnian. And my family, because of everything that we were going through, never got around to actually sit down as a family and say, how should we name this incredible animal that came into our lives? And I would also add to what you said that in many ways, Matzi symbolizes not only this unconditional love that I had gotten when everybody else around on the hills with their artillery was killing me and hating me viscerally. Not only that she loved me in the most loyal, beautiful way, and reminded me that I can still be loved even when I am so deeply hated. But she also represents a parallel to many times in our lives, assuming that some people will be unimportant to us. Just if you look at the context in the United States today with the global pandemic, so many essential workers that perhaps we will never get to truly know, who are strangers to us, whose names we will not know, but who make a difference in our lives every day. So Cat really played a crucial role in my life. Matzi was incredibly important to us. I do have to say that, as you can imagine, given what I had gone through, I have struggled for much of my life with the idea of loss. And I have a very hard time losing people. Of course, I have experienced death of friends and family members, even after the war. In fact, some of close people to me who couldn't deal with what we had survived during the war, who took their own lives after the war. So I never had another pet after losing Matzi, because it was a tremendously deep trauma for me. And in many ways, I also doubted that I could ever find another animal as special as she was. And in fact, last year, in the midst of pandemic, my younger daughter, Dina, and I, after a storm encountered where we live in upstate New York, this nest with a couple of birds that were hurt in the nest, and we managed to save one, and we were feeding her for a couple of days. And when she passed on, I had a difficult time with that. And Dina came to me and said, "Mom, now more than ever, I understand why it is difficult for you to have another pet." So I never found another Matzi. And I think it's clear in my writing that this particular animal was incredibly unique and in some ways magical, that it is at times, for some who have read the book, hard to believe that she truly happened. But what's beautiful for me today, when many Bosnians who grew up with me in my neighborhood, who experienced very similar things, write to me after reading the book, they all remember Matzi, and they write about specific events or moments where they encountered Matzi. She was a very special and unique cat.
Thank you so much. And I totally get it. Loss, I take loss very hard too. And Matzi, I'm gonna say, Matzi is never truly gone. She will always be with you. Never forget that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nico. That is very kind of you to say. I mentioned her before we started recording in this interview and conversation. I mentioned that I went out for a walk with my husband this morning, and in a conversation, he said something, and I said, "Oh, what would Matzi do now?" So Matzi is always with us. I always talk about her. My kids grew up with stories of Matzi, and even when they were little, they would actually draw Matzi in when they would paint me as their mom during the war, as they were telling their own stories in their classroom. So I appreciate you saying that she will always be here with me.
You're welcome. Oh, Diana, did you have something to say?
Yes, I was going to ask a question. When did you first realize that you wanted to become a writer?
Another excellent question. I actually wrote I always used to write in school and enjoy writing. So I was, as you know from the book, I loved math and physics and was a true nerd and geek in that sense, and won some math and physics competitions that ultimately got me here to the United States. But I also enjoyed writing, and I, in fact, wrote poetry during the war. That was the first form of written expression that I used to really capture the emotions and loss and tragedy and trauma that I had experienced. But in the moment when my house was bombed, as you know from the book, a lot of things were destroyed and lost, and I never found at least some of those poems. Some survived, and later on, I lost them during other events in the war. So I always had that tendency to put on paper my emotions, and I think I'm a very emotional writer when it comes to particularly producing The Cat That Never Named. Emotions drove my inspiration and my visual memory. I listened to a lot of Bosnian music, in fact, to trigger myself and put myself into the space and the time during the war. But in addition to that, I think writing has become an important component of my work professionally as a professor at Columbia. I have done a lot of academic writing, and so it's a different style, and there's a different, perhaps, purpose to it. But I had always had writing as a sort of critical component of who I am, and it showed up in my life in one way or another. But the moment that triggered this particular book happened a couple of years ago when my younger daughter, Dina, who was in third grade in a school here in New York, came home one day and asked me what would happen to her and her older sister, Jana, if my husband, her dad, and I were rounded up as Muslims and taken away. She asked if Jana and her would be left alone. And that was the moment when I realized that the political, social narrative and conversation in this country was really filled with these notions of hatred and othering and marginalization and exclusion that I experienced growing up. And I got scared. What would happen to my child? What would happen to many teens and children in this country who were afraid of violence potentially in the future against their families simply for their racial or religious background. And that was the moment that turned me into a passionate writer, where I sat down and said, I have to share my story with the world, and simply lend it to educators to teach about visceral hatred that can lead ultimately to genocide.
Thank you. And I understand, because when something is happening to your life and it's like you, for example, you can't talk to your parents because they are so worried, and you don't want to make them so more worried. And so it's kind of like the way you write and your poems and something for your feelings, so you just can't express. And that's great. I did too. I do that too. Thank you.
You're welcome. Awesome. And you should continue to do that, Diana. I think it's very important. And one day you will reflect back. I wish I had my poems now. I would publish them now. They're written in Bosnian. I would publish them at least in Bosnian and perhaps in English. But unfortunately, I don't have them. And it's important to have that part of you and remember those emotions and moments and how you process them. So keep writing.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, my sister had a question.
Oh, okay. So, hi. I'm so excited to see you because I'm reading your book, and then, I have a question. Did you ever think that your story is gonna become so popular in the world?
Thank you for that question, Camilla. And I did not. I actually did not think about how people will review my book. I didn't think about literary awards. I actually only thought about this feeling of urgency that I had in me, and really a sense that I almost abandoned my responsibility as a genocide survivor to share my story. Because I was, as a professor at Columbia, I have done a lot of work around the world on issues in education and inclusion and marginalization and othering, all sorts of issues that I talk about in my book in slightly different way than I do as a professor at Columbia. And I realized that I was not doing enough, and that it was important for me to actually make myself in some ways vulnerable and share with people how painful this experience can be, so that I could potentially evoke empathy in those who might hate me as a Muslim. And I may not change everybody, but hopefully I could change some people and their Islamophobic views. And that was what I had in my mindset as I was writing. I really never thought about reviews and awards and people inviting me all around the world. But what I realized in the last couple of months is that the story that I tell in The Cat I Never Named is a story that many people recognize might repeat itself in many different global contexts today because of this rise of hatred. And so many educators, many adults, many teens are seeing it as an important story and as an important warning against hate. And I do have to say, one of the most important subgroups of the audience that I've spoken to over the last 6 months or so have been other genocide survivors. Just 2 days ago, I was talking to one of the survivors from a concentration camp in Bosnia. I spoke a couple of months ago in Denmark to an association of concentration camp survivors from Bosnia who in many ways have difficult time sharing their stories, because it is not easy to open yourself up to the world and say, this is how I felt and this is how I was hurt. And so I never expected this. This has been really organic and very spontaneous. but I'm really grateful that my story has had such a global impact, and that has inspired me to work on a second book, which is what I'm writing as we speak. I was working on it just before getting on the phone with or Zoom with all of you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you.
Welcome.
I have a question. I'm Camila and she's Shakira. She had asked a question, now I'm going to ask a question. What happened to your other friends? I'm sorry, I didn't finish the book because I was so busy. But like, what happened to your other Serb friends, and do you have any contacts with them?
I'm probably going to tackle that a little bit in my my new book. There will be mention of my best friend who's a Serb. She did reach out to me, but did not really acknowledge or recognize anything that had happened to me or to other Bosnian Muslims. And so I sent her in response a very long letter detailing all of our friends and everyone who was killed and lost, and those who were raped. And I never heard back from her again.
Hi, I'm Shukuru, and I would like to know what part of the book did you have the hardest time writing?
Did I have the hardest time writing?
Yes.
The moment when I come close to being raped by a Serb soldier, the moment when my mother and I are so desperate to provide, or my mother is so desperate to provide food for us, and decides to cross the enemy line to try to buy food from our enemies, fully aware that that may mean the end of her life. And when I decided to go with her, again, fully aware that we might be making the final decision in our lives in an attempt to survive. And so that was the hardest moment. That was one of the hardest moments for me during the war, where I felt deeply, deeply miserable and desperate, and forgotten by the world and forgotten by humanity.
Thank you for sharing.
You're welcome.
Hi. How do you feel when you were in the war?
How did I feel? War is such an extreme experience. And one of the reasons I wrote The Cat I Never Named was really not to just allow a reader to read my story, but to really join in emotionally and experience in some ways what I had gone through the war. I would describe living through a war emotionally as an emotional whirlpool, where emotions are extreme, right? Extreme happiness when I get a piece of food, or when I fell in love, as you know from the book, when I fell in love with my first boyfriend for the first time. And so excitement in those little moments that probably as a teen you're excited about anyway, but in the war, the feeling of happiness can often be magnified and exaggerated because you're aware that the next day you could no longer be alive, and it's not your choice, it's not your decision. And so at the same time, obviously the feeling of loss and a lot of sad moments that you have to learn to live with and become resilient to, so that it doesn't break you emotionally. So in the war, I really became a much stronger human being in handling those emotions and making sure that I can survive no matter what happens. And so it was a great education. I often say war was the best education I had received in my life, because I learned so many lessons, including how to counter hatred, including how to be resilient to hatred and succeed no matter what.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Hi, Amra, it's Nico again. So, one part of the book that also hung with me was the day of your birthday. when you got that big chocolate cake that everyone was so shocked to see. I was like, that sounds so good. But when you saw when you saw the warriors come, the one thing I picked up on was your courage and your strength, that you would not let them break you down. Amazing. Has that strength carried on to you throughout this book? How have you coped with that, with the trauma that they were putting you through? Like, has this book helped you through that process, sharing it with the world, sharing it with people even you knew who went through it as well? How has that helped you through the traumas?
That's an excellent question, and there are a couple of different directions I could take in answering the question. I'll tell you that first of all, the story legitimized my experience in many ways. I grew up in former Yugoslavia in a system where we were not really allowed to say that we were Muslim. We were not allowed to, actually legally, we couldn't say we were Bošnjak. We could only say we were Muslim from 1961 on, but we could never say that we belonged to Bošnjaks as an ethnic group. And so I lived in a system where I was not represented and I was invisible. I never read stories that had Muslim girls in it. I never solved a math problem with the Muslim child's name in it. And so being aware of that was very difficult. And it was always internal because I couldn't complain about it. I couldn't tell to a system that was put in place to marginalize Muslims, I would like to have a voice. I knew that that would have repercussions and that had consequences. And so, as you know, I described several moments with teachers who could openly put me down as a Muslim, and I couldn't say or do anything about it. And so having this ability and really privilege, I think storytelling and writing a book is a privilege. Not everybody gets the opportunity to do that. I took it very seriously because I knew that in this story, not only do I represent myself, but I also give an opportunity to others who feel less represented, irrespective for what their background is, not necessarily only Muslims, but any other marginalized group, that they could see my struggles with representation, that I think is a problem in the United States, for instance, with anti-Black racism and anti-immigrant sentiment and different forms of discrimination that we see in this country. So this book really did empower me. And certainly all these conversations that I'm having globally have been self-empowering, but I also hope that they have been empowering for those who engage in, like you, who engage in conversations with me. I do have to say that at the same time, I have been attacked for writing this book by, for instance, white supremacy groups. I was in Austria, in Europe, speaking at the University of Klagenfurt. I was doing a book reading when I was interrupted and screen was taken over by a neo-Nazi group that had all these images of sexual violence and swastikas on my screen and everybody else's screens. And so when one decides to speak out against hatred, what happens? Those who engage in perpetuating the narrative of hatred and different forms of racism, they try to intimidate authors and educators like myself. But I do have to say that is a minor impact on me. It only reminds me that I need to speak more, that I need to write more stories, and that we need to counter that kind of narrative even more deeply and more widely in our societies.
Thank you. And again, I am so sorry for that. I have never went through that, but I can definitely see how that impacts you and how that really makes you feel. What I'm going to say is that your strength, your words are your strength. This book has given thousands of people insight of what you went through, what your family went through, what friends went through. And I know every one of us who have read this book has felt your anger and your sadness and your rage, but we've also felt that courage and that strength behind those words. So I applaud you to continue writing. We want to hear more, and we just want to see the world grow behind your words. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nico. Beautifully said. Beautifully said. Thank you.
I love the idea that you wrote this book, because it showed that perspective of you, the feelings, the things that you went through. And it's not only you, but a lot of people went through a lot of things, but not all people like to write about their feelings, about their experiences. And it's great to hear about you writing your book, to read your thoughts, read your feelings, what we went through, because it's really hard to be in that war. I never been in war, but I know the feeling just to reading the book. It makes kind of like the feelings and understand you, even if I've never been in a war. So I like that. And I have another question. It's, what do you like to do when you're not writing? A lot of hobby, another thing to do.
Thank you for your kind words, Diana. And I like to do a lot of things, and that's part of my problem. I tend to be involved in various different projects. I work with a lot of organizations internationally to really promote many of the ideas that are in my book, countering hatred, promoting human rights. So I've served on various boards of different organizations. In addition to that, I do a lot of mentoring. So I mentor young people. I think it's very important for those of us who have had the privilege to have some form of success in our lives, to actually open doors for others. So I mentor students from various universities who have encountered some difficulties. And again, I do that through different organizations. I am particularly involved with Brown University, which was my undergraduate school. Brown is in Providence, Rhode Island. And they gave me a full scholarship when I came to the United States, as you know from the book. And the institution really changed my life. That experience changed trajectory of who I thought that I would become. And as a paid forward, I continue to be very involved with them. But in terms of real fun, I love teen romantic movies, because I never got to be a real teenager in high school. So I do have two daughters. One is in 7th grade, and one is in second year of high school. And they make fun of me because I love to watch movies that are really made for them, because they're easy. They don't usually have a lot of tragic things happening in them, and there's always a beautiful love story. So that's something I love to do with my daughters when they want to watch a movie with me.
Thank you. And I also wanted to say that when I want to express something, I really love to paint, like paintings, not like in coloring books. No, I like to paint this. I don't know, it makes me relax. I just wanted to say that. But thank you for everything you say.
That is wonderful that you enjoy art. I'll add this. I love gardening. That's another thing. When you talked about painting and relaxing, I do love to garden. And as you know from the book, we had a war garden. So I still do have a garden every year, and it has been particularly helpful in the pandemic. I like to give whatever vegetables or herbs I grow. I like to share them with my friends and my neighbors, and it's very relaxing to be in my garden. So,
thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so I have a question like, did you ever went back to your home country, or if you go, what is gonna be your first feeling, and then what's gonna be the first word that is gonna come up to your mind?
That's a great question. I actually go to Bosnia very often. I still do a lot of research. So I've done a lot of data collection for different projects that I've done in Bosnia, and I just travel there usually once a year at least, and sometimes more often if there is a reason for me to go back. And it's always emotional for me. I often say that I feel the best when I'm on a plane, because I belong to multiple worlds. I belong in part to the culture and traditions and what Bosnia is all about. And obviously my experience growing up there has shaped me and formed me and defines who I am today and what I do today. But at the same time, I am very much a proud American. I love this country for giving me an opportunity to have a second chance at life and have built my family and friends and professional career here. So it's difficult to sometimes exist between these different worlds. And I'm always happy and sad at the same time. When I go to Bosnia, I'm happy and sad. When I'm coming to the United States, I'm happy and sad because I always feel I'm leaving something behind. But that is, I think, a life of some of those who have been forced to leave their countries for the reasons that I had left, such as persecution and surviving genocide.
Who is your favorite author?
Oh, I have to say Laura Sullivan, who worked with me actually on the cat I never named. Laura and I met through my book agent, and she's written some beautiful books for teens as well. When I decided to write The Cat I Never Named, I was looking for someone who would help me with making sure that my story is really written in a way that it can be read by teens, right? Because there are different standards of what can be included, particularly with some tough topics. And Laura has worked with me. We actually never met. We spoke maybe 2 or 3 times over the phone, but we often send each other writing back and forth and have developed an amazing working relationship. And we're going to continue to work on other projects and books going forward. So I would highly recommend that you read her books as well.
Okay, I would like to ask that I read in book that your mom was a teacher, and then your dad was so good, and then your parents was wonderful. And then what are some strong memories that you have from your parents?
Oh, I have many beautiful memories of my father in particular, who is no longer with us. And my mom lives with my family here. So she's still a very important and critical part of my life, and has always been a very, as you know from the book, a very strong and steady form of support in everything that I've done, and not only I've done, but my entire family. And I have my younger brother, who's still in Bosnia, Dino, who's also another important character. And you know that I had an older brother, Amar, who was who had disability and had a hard time walking and was bullied. And as you know, I get into a fight with some troubled boys because of teasing and bullying of Amar and his memory. But we always had a very strong family, and I would say that strength within my family and the love that we had for each other was always critical in enabling me to overcome everything that I had survived during the war. The memories of my dad, in particular, memories of his storytelling. He was a great storyteller himself. He was an orphan from World War II. His father's grave was never found. His father died fighting Nazis at that time. And my father walked himself through forests in post-war Bosnia to a small town where he enrolled himself into an orphanage. And he got in humanitarian aid at the time these super heavy, huge shoes that were very uncomfortable, and he held them in his hand because he wanted to save them from being damaged as he walked through the forest, and then put them on after washing his feet in a nearby stream before he entered the orphanage, because he wanted to look presentable and be accepted into an orphanage. And then he traded those shoes with another boy who had a toothbrush. And my father never saw a toothbrush before then. And so he gave up his shoes for a toothbrush. And so I grew up with stories like that. That was my dad. He was extremely emotional. He was a brilliant man. He loved reciting poetry, and always hugged us and told us how much he loved us, because he didn't get the chance to hear that from his father. And my mother was always a problem solver and was this incredibly strong person in our family. And my memories of her are that anytime any friend or extended family member had a problem, they were knocking on our doors and coming for advice to my mom. And my mom was always there, always calm, always composed, and always having a rational explanation of how someone should address a particular problem. And so they were a beautiful couple together, because they really provided us with everything we needed as kids in terms of love and support and learning to do well in life. And I do have to say that I miss my brother incredibly much. He lives in Bosnia still. We talk every day. He right now is sick with COVID. In fact, he's doing okay. I call him 5 times a day. And we often talk about our parents and how important they've been to us in our lives.
Oh, I wish him good health from God, and then thank you so much for sharing such a good, beautiful memories.
Thank you. Thank you.
What you went through, it's unforgettable, and we see some of the things happening now. Maybe not genocide, but we definitely see the hatred and the violence, and there's definitely some conflict between humanity, especially in America and other countries. What would you tell those people who might be going through such thing as like deportation, hatred, racial inequality? What would you tell them to kind of give them hope that, the whole world isn't like this? The world can change. And sorry, what would you tell them that kind of help them through that pain and that process?
Mm-hmm. The first very simple message would be, never assume that you know someone until you get to know them. And so one principle that I have in life is that I never assume that an entire group of people are at fault for something. And so even with many Serbs who hated me, who were engaged in the genocide, I refuse to believe that we can ever uniformly categorize or describe or collectively place a guilt on a group of people. I think we need to look out for those who are hoping to change the world. And I would always suggest, particularly to young people, to surround yourself with those people who have a sense of social justice and wish to make a difference in this world. And the best way to do it is to focus on education. And when I say education, it doesn't only mean performing well in school and focusing on mastering whatever content in the curriculum is offered, but also challenging it when it suggests injustice, and critically thinking and being independent and calling out injustice when you see it, standing up against it. Not through violence, not through engaging and countering hate with hate, because then we become the mirror image of those who hate and who want to perpetuate those kinds of divisions. And so my hope is that you will be inspired by reading The Cat I Never Named to look at my story and think about someone who has seen the worst of humanity, but who has yet been able to find internal strength to say, I won't be part of this. I want to be part of something much more positive, and I will dedicate my life to countering this kind of hatred. So it doesn't happen not only to Bosnian Muslims, but doesn't happen even to those who have hated me, who were killing me. And I do have to say that I've gotten so many messages from young people around the world who have said that they've been inspired by that message, and that they have decided to pursue a degree, or they've decided to really focus on their education after reading The Cat I Never Named.
I find that extremely wonderful. Thank you so much. Does anybody else have any other questions?
And I have a question.
I do. You can go, Diana.
Okay, thank you. What was your first book and how old were you?
My first book that I read?
No, when you write like...
Right. This is the first book that I wrote. So The Cat I Never Named is my first book. And probably I would say that probably a book that I have been thinking about for a very long time, but have delayed it in many ways because I was worried about my own emotions in writing The Cat I Never Named. Then while I in some ways perhaps regret I haven't shared my story earlier, at the same time I think I shared it at a moment when this country needs it more perhaps than ever before. Of course, I didn't know that my book would come in the midst of, I always say, multiple pandemics, pandemic of racism, pandemic of COVID-19, and all sorts of negative emotions that have been on the rise in the United States. And so in some ways, perhaps Matzi was my guiding light and inspiration and some higher force that said to me, this was the time to share my story with the world, and this was the right time for this book.
Yes, I understand, because sometimes like you think about it like, should I just read? So like people would like to read this book, and it's really, really good to understand. So people, now that we're in the pandemic, I think people, obviously, people who likes to read, they would like to more read about it. Well, I love this type of books about historic people who went through things, about war, about a lot of things. I like to read these books, and thank you for write this book, because it's really emotional. I understand, even I'm never been into your type of life you went through in your teenage, but thank you for doing this book, for writing this book.
Thank you, Diane.
Miss, it was like, what really pushed you write this story? Did when your cat like passed out? No, I mean like died or something?
It wasn't that. What made me write the story was rise of hatred in the United States over the last couple of years. And I think I mentioned earlier conversations that I had started with the question with my younger daughter, but really conversations I had with my daughters and also my students at Columbia University, who've often said to me in the context of courses that I teach, and I've started my career at Columbia as a professor teaching statistics and probability theory courses, which a lot of students don't enjoy. And so you have to find ways to really demonstrate why the numbers and trends and things that we study in statistics are meaningful and important. And so I would always build a story around a particular project we would work on so that students understand why it's meaningful to be able to deal with numbers and facts. And they would often come to me after years after graduating, and my students are graduate students, so masters or doctoral students who are typically from all over the world and become influential in their countries, working for ministries of education or running schools or universities. And so they would often reach out to me years later and say, Amra, a story that you shared in a particular class really impacted how I treat other people or how I think about the world today. When will you write your book? So the desire to sit down and write the book was really a culmination process of shaped and influenced by many different factors and individuals. But the ultimate tipping point was my concern for the future of the United States of America over the last couple of years.
Thank you. And how old were you when you wrote your this book, The Cat I Never Named It? What did you do before it? Before you became an author?
So author is just one of the hats that I wear. I am my full-time job, if you will. What I do is I'm a professor at Columbia University. And in that context, I do a lot of writing, academic writing, research writing. I'm working on various projects around the world. This book I started writing a couple of years ago. So this has been in process, I would say, for about 2 to 3 years in different ways. So it takes about a year, I would say, for once the book is finished to actually be published. So I finished it a year before it came out. Yes, there's always editing and different small changes, but the majority of the work is done well in advance of you as a reader seeing the book.
How old were you when you wrote the book?
Well, how old am I now? What do you think?
Let's not get into that.
Maybe you're 43, 42?
You're close. Pretty good. I wish I was 21, but you're closer.
I feel like you're 30.
I was going to say around the 30s too, so.
Good. I'll take 32. That works for me.
Okay. Well, does anybody else have any questions? Adults, Miss Burleson.
I was going to say, if not one thing, thank you, Dr. Amra. If we could take a picture of the group, that would be great. Ready, set, cheese. Yes. Thank you, Amra. I hope you have, are you doing any other presentations for the festival?
Yeah, I'm doing one at 5 o'clock my time. So
great.
A few hours.
Yeah. Well, may it go well. And like I said, may spring come sooner than later for you guys out east. And thank you so much for your memoir and for your sharing your thoughts and with the kids today.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for taking your time out. It was lovely meeting you and talking to you and getting a lot of the experiences that you went through. And I think that's it. Thank you. Have a good day, Amra.
Thank you. Thank you, Nico. Thank you, everybody else, for your wonderful questions and for inviting me. And keep working hard. And remember, the 3 most important things in life are education, education, and education. So focus on that, not only in school, but also working with your librarians, because that is where you're going to meet the rest of the world that perhaps you haven't experienced yet, like the cat I never named. So good luck to all of you, and thank you again.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Pretty.